This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where we explore meaning in movies together. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. It's another episode of A Lost Plot. It's your boy, Maverick, here with our guest, who's back once again. We appreciate your time. Welcome, Avalon.
Hello, hola, konnichiwa, and leho.
Now, today, we are reviewing a little bit of an older movie. I guess not that old, but like 4 or 5 years old, in preparation for a movie coming out in a couple weeks. That's right. Today, we are reviewing Captain Marvel. Released in 2019, it's an American superhero film. The screenplay is by Anna Boden, Ryan Fleck, Geneva Robertson Dworet, and also it had notes that the story was by a couple other people as well, so we're going to note those here too. Nicole Perlman, Meg LaFave, Anna Boden, Ryan Fleck, and Geneva Robertson Dworet. And it was directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. Anyways, those are all the people that are responsible for this story. If you love it, great. If you hate it, blame them. Anyways, let's look at the starring. It stars Brie Larson as Carol Danvers / Captain Marvel. Samuel L. Jackson, our very own, coming back again as a younger version of Nick Fury. Ben Mendelsohn as Tails and Keller. That doesn't. I think my notes auto-corrected on that one. The Skrulls. Anyways, doesn't matter. I'm sorry. That's not nice to Ben. Anyways, Jude Law is Jan Rog, and that's all we're gonna do right now. Doesn't matter. Yeah. So Alan, you want to tell us what the Captain Marvel is about?
So Captain Marvel is a story about a girl who she's like a soldier in training she's like, at the beginning of the movie, she's kind of a soldier in training. She becomes a soldier for the Kree Empire, this alien race, blue-skinned aliens who we've seen before in the Marvel movies, though she looks human.
Right.
She, she's working for the Kree, and they're at war with this alien race of shapeshifters called the Skrulls. On a mission to retrieve a vital Kree intelligence officer, they get ambushed by the Skrulls, and Captain Marvel, or as she's known at the time of the movie, Veers, she gets captured, and they start messing with her head. And when they mess with her head, she starts seeing things that shouldn't be there, which kind of puts her on a journey to figure out, not only stop them, to figure out what happened and who she really is.
That's all good. What did you overall think of this movie? On a scale of 0 to 9, what were your thoughts? How well do you think they did?
Okay, so my starting score, before we start discussing it, is 3.2.
I just realized I didn't add up mine. I'm adding it up right now.
Oh, no.
My bad. I know. I pulled a U. My bad. Okay.
I've only done that once, and now you've done it.
Yeah.
Now we're even.
I gave this movie a 3.75.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that we come so close. I also think it's funny.
I think with this rating system, now it's like our answers are coming closer, it feels like, our point rating for some reason.
It's interesting. One of the things I have appreciated about it, as a side note, especially going over it today, was how I feel like it's been good for me to actually think through some of the aspects I probably wouldn't in a more emotional situation, right? So when I was reviewing this, so a background for this, I have not, for you who are listening, Avalon knows this, but I have never watched Captain Marvel before this past weekend. So, and part of that reason was because I had heard just terrible things about it. And so that kind of created the baseline for me of what to expect. Now, that baseline can very much affect how much you enjoy that movie without changing the story itself. Expectations, I think, do play a role into it. And so it's hard to avoid to some degree, but I found that this rating system helps to temper that. And so what often happens is if you have low expectations, it's a lot easier for you to be pleased and enjoy a movie. Versus if you have high expectations, it's a lot easier for them to go poorly and for you to not enjoy it. So, anyways, all that to say is I was expecting crap, and it wasn't as crap as I thought it was going to be.
Mhm.
So I enjoyed the watch through, but I could also see some of the big issues with it. So this is
Mhm.
by no means a great. Obviously, I give it a 3.75. So this is like low tier, but it's interesting because I think if I had just gone off my gut without having this system, I would have given it probably higher than it deserved, to be honest. So, anyways,
Hmm.
little bit of a plug for the 9 point rating system. Try it out, you guys yourselves. If you want to take a look at what exactly that looks like and my step by step go through of that, we have a podcast earlier. It's a movies worth watching episode called 9 Points. So look that up. Yeah, there should be a link to it down below wherever you're listening to this. Anyways, all right, we'll get back to the video. So the opening scene, how did you think about the scene? Did it catch your attention? Did it make you want to keep watching?
I don't know. I feel like it wasn't a bad opening, but it wasn't a great opening. Like it wasn't like I don't know. Like there was some interesting things going on, but it also felt a little cliched. Maybe I don't know. Like you have the person waking up, almost like in the battlefield situation, chaos around them, and you see this figure moving through the smoke, and then she wakes up. It's a dream kind of thing, or it's like,
Hmm.
and then she's like, can't sleep kind of situation. Like I mean, it wasn't like totally unique opening, but it was like it had some things going for it. I mean, I'll be honest. You should have a figure like you have a dream sequence like that, chaos. There's going, okay, what happened? Like that's going to create intrigue in your
Right.
mind. And then you also have a mysterious shape coming out of the smoke who you don't fully see at that moment in the movie. And it's like, okay, like something happened, someone was there, who was that kind of thing. And also, like, in a certain way, that whole opening scene kind of foreshadows the, like, who was that? Because, like, it becomes important later on in the movie.
Right.
So, I mean, I kind of gave it, like, middle ground points on the opening, but it wasn't, like, great or bad.
So I'll tell you my impression of the beginning, and then I'd love to know what you think because I do think you're not wrong. It did, and this is part of the thing about superhero movies at this point is we have
Mm-hmm.
so many superhero movies that there is a sense in which can you have a super unique beginning for something like this? And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard to have that super unique beginning where you got to see, oh, okay, they show the characters, they establish their powers, they establish whatever the difficulties are or whatever. And having the dream aspect is a very common aspect to have in movies, and so I get the clichéness, and it is the responsibility of the writers to try to subvert expectations and make it as surprising as possible, which means you have to try to find different efforts. I think what I'm looking for at the opening is maybe whether or not it's cliche can affect this, but it doesn't make it the end all. Just because it's cliche doesn't mean that the opening scene can't catch your attention, make you want to keep watching. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that they did pretty good at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
setting up the idea of like a bunch of mystery around who she is, why she's
Mm-hmm.
there, because she doesn't even know. And so this is clearly a journey of self discovery or self
Mm-hmm.
exploration of trying to figure out clearly something happened in my past that I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
need to figure out what that is. And so part of that is just fundamental to her character. Like who she is as a person is different from a lot of other superheroes, such as Iron Man, who clearly knows that he's the billionaire playboy philanthropist with cool gadgets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the beginning of Captain America, or any of those other superheroes, where they know who they are. They kind of have this. They have their own conflicts, but the fact that she doesn't know who she is, I thought was interesting enough and added enough questions right off the bat that I was curious to know what happened. So I
Mm-hmm.
gave him points on that. Um, but yeah, the idea that some of these things are a little cliche is there.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, what did you think about the main character? Did you think that Varys was a flawed hero, one that was flawed in a way that found compelling?
I mean, I didn't find her very flawed as a character. You get the impression that she can do. I mean, I mean, slight spoilers. Like she is slightly naive in that she's kind of manipulated in some regards. So I
Sure.
guess you could say that's a flaw, but I don't know if it's strong enough to be a flaw in this movie because she seems to know like a good deal of every situation she's in, and it's like almost like she figures things out really quickly. So
Right.
I don't know. There's almost a part of me. It's almost like I'm not sure if that counts in this case as a flaw for her because she's not. It's not very strong. It's not very developed.
When you say that she figured things out quickly, what comes to mind?
Well, for one thing, when she comes to Earth, like she figures out certain things very quickly, and she's also like she kind of figures out how the world works very quickly, more or less. Like she does not a whole lot of like alien like understanding of some things. Like she kind of figures things out on her own, learns quickly. Uh, I mean, maybe she. I don't know. I may a little bit conflicted on this a little too this time around, but she's and also she's able to do like all her own tech stuff. Like she hacks, like she goes into a tech store, builds her own communicator. She knows how to search for information. She knows how to do all like to interrogate people. Like she has all these like skills like innately. It seems like she has like this
Hmm.
powerhouse of abilities that I don't know. Part of it seems to make sense, but it doesn't. It's like okay, if you think too hard about it,
Right.
it becomes one of those things for me where it's like, I don't know how believable her character is on a certain level.
The self-sufficient individual that can craft anything they want, drive anything they want, fight
Mm,
anyone they want.
yeah.
So they're self-sufficient in every way. Yeah.
hmm Yeah. I mean, she does. She isn't like she does. I mean, she is a little naive. I mean, and she isn't like. It's not like she starts at the beginning of the movie on the right side. Like she doesn't know which
Hmm.
side she's supposed to be on. Clearly, her and obviously her memories have been wiped, so she doesn't know like her own past. But I mean, like as a flaw, I don't know. Like it's like what do you count as a flaw? I guess maybe that's the question here. Like what
Hmm.
would constitute a flaw in this case? I had a hard time finding something that I would constitute as a huge flaw or drawback as the character, something that she would have to overcome and be a better person.
And I get that. It's because you can have these almost like faux risks or faux flaws, and they
hmm
say, "Oh, she's arrogant. That's a flaw." And it's I almost feel like arrogance needs some time to breathe on its own before it can be used as a flaw anymore.
hmm
Partially, and to be fair, that might just be because it's played out poorly, but it's so used as a flaw at this point that
hmm
it's hard for us to empathize with that.
hmm
Versus, and this might be a good example actually. I don't know if our audience has seen Lelouch of the Rebellion in Code Geass, but the the primary character in that show, is an incredibly arrogant, egotistical individual, and that is one of his primary flaws. Is that he is so self-centered that um, he's willing to put other people in harm's way. And so, and maybe that's the thing, right? In these characters that are supposed to be arrogant or brash or whatever, that are they have a little bit of this chip on their shoulder. It's like they're not. It doesn't actually terminate in anything that pushes us away, right?
hmm
We don't look at that and go, oh, you really need to improve that, right?
hmm
Or that there's and the reason this is important, right, is because this by having this flaw, you provide an opportunity for this person to grow and develop personally
hmm
throughout the story. And so if there is nothing they need to grow in as a flaw, then there's no way for them to grow.
hmm
And that's actually one of the critiques I have with this movie, is that she doesn't there's nothing for her to grow into. And so at the end of the
Yeah.
day, she gains incredibly new information from this story, but it doesn't make her a better person. She just switches allegiances.
Well, if you look at the beginning of the movie, at the end of the movie, if you just look at her character and her actions and who she is as a person, she doesn't change. Like as a
Right.
character, she doesn't really like she doesn't become more humble, doesn't become more this or that. I'm not sure if she's arrogant. She's definitely more callous as a character. But
Sure.
and maybe she's a little arrogant, but it's one of those things where it's like flaws and everything. Like she doesn't change, so there's not really like a character journey for her. It's just like all she does is she learns new information about where she comes from, which side she's actually on, and like that's all it really changes. And
Right.
I mean, for storytelling purposes, you could still tell a good story through events, but as far as characters go, it's not a very compelling character.
Captain Marvel, to me, looks like one of the characters that is the most developed you can be and still be a poor character. In two ways. Like she was interesting still as a person. She almost embodies in many ways the great example of the competent woman going
Mm-hmm.
out and fighting the battles of the universe. And if you're going
Mm-hmm.
to have a
Although she,
competent woman at the front lines, this is the kind of person you have. She's funny, she's quick-witted, she's competent, she's got the attitude that you almost feel like someone who's on the front lines like that needs to have. Going back to what you're saying is her being callous. Her
mm-hmm.
biggest thing is that she doesn't have to grow in any ways because she doesn't have any serious flaws or
Mm-hmm.
has an opportunity to grow in any ways that we can relate to. And two, she's just too powerful, which
Mm-hmm.
or that
Yeah.
she is too powerful. I don't think that's debatable.
Yeah,
But
she really has no weakness.
yeah, and that's a big issue, I think, with this later on. But
Mm,
still interesting. Anyways, we'll get to that.
mm.
Do you have any more thoughts on her initial development before we get on to the side characters?
You mentioned something about how she embodies ideals. I think that's one thing about her that she does. This movie does kind of do well in certain regards, but that's a whole nother discussion we'll come to in a bit. So
Sure. Yeah,
I will
I'm
get
I'm
to.
really curious what you have to say on that because
Mm,
um, yeah, I found this movie a lot more interesting than I thought I was going to, for
mm,
sure.
mm.
Uh, anyways, side characters. Are they driven by their own motives, their own needs?
This was an interesting point. Like this was an interesting question because there's some that are, but some that aren't. Where it's like, for example, uh, Fury. Like
Uh huh.
his character has motive. Like you kind of see where he's coming from. You like there is like you can see explanation for his actions. So it's like they logically follow through. Like, okay, you like he's a kind of a developed character where it's like okay, you follow him, he's understandable. You can empathize with him and what he's trying to figure out, what's going on. And even with the scrolls, like once they develop and give certain information about them, you can actually empathize with them too. Like there's actually an aspect of their characters where they're developed, even though they're side characters. Like you can get where they're coming from. You can follow their story, their
Yeah.
ideas. So like there are some developed side characters, but then there's some that just don't have enough development, and it's like it's not clear what they're doing and why. Like I would argue that Jude Law's character, I forget his name, like his character doesn't have
Yeah.
enough development.
Yon
Like he's
Sog or whatever
trying
it
to
is.
protect Veers and train her, and it's not even clear at the end of the movie why. Like, what was the
Right.
point of trying to train her? Like, what was like, what did you get out of this? And there's even moments in the movie where it's like he protects her, and it's like, and at the end of the movie, it's not clear why he protected her. Like, what was the point? Like, it's like his character doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
They did well with showing him at the beginning being
Mm-hmm.
on the good guy, quote unquote, good side
Mm-hmm.
because he was protecting her, and this is the perspective you see. So that it was a great frame switch when they
Mm-hmm.
turned them into the bad characters because they painted them as good all
Mm-hmm.
the way at the beginning. So yeah, you are right on that. But then when they flip, and it's kind of similar to actually it's even worse than the Hateful Eight, where the villains actually had more of a motivation given at the beginning, and then when they flip, you're like, well, now you have no motivation. There wasn't really that much motivation for the Kree at the beginning or afterwards. Not
Mm-hmm.
really. They're
I mean,
just protecting the universe or
mm,
protecting the Kree civilization.
I think the only explanations you can really give for the Kree is plays into ideals, which we can discuss later when we get to the ideal portion. Um, but
Right.
other than that, like there isn't. I mean, other than that, they're just the tyrannical like civilization who's trying to rule everyone with an iron thumb kind of thing. Where it's like, okay,
Right.
uh, so yeah, but there's not really a whole lot of motivation for the Kree and what they're doing in this part of the movie, which I'd like to say from this going to my nerd knowledge kind of thing. this is kind of funny because the Kree aren't this way in the comics. At least the comics I've
Oh,
read. The Kree are like the scientific organization that are like heavily into science, like technology kind of stuff. At least from what I've
huh.
read. So it's like they're kind of not this. They're not good or bad per se. They're just kind of like this middle like alien race in the comics. Which is like
Yeah.
so it's a kind of weird switch. If anything, the Skrulls were that way. Like they're the tyrants who are like trying to rule everyone. So it's
Right.
kind of a weird switch that this movie did. So I'm not sure why, but it was interesting in that regard. If you're a comics fan,
Intriguing. I wonder how, and I'm sure they go into this in the Secret Invasion, but
hmm
the how they flip the script on the Skrill or Scroll
yeah,
in Secret Invasion with this background of them being, oh, they're such great people, or they're just trying to protect themselves and save themselves and all that stuff.
well, it gives the impression that they're fugitives, like they're
Right.
refugees, like trying to escape, like just trying to escape an oppressive like government or persecution. Like, oh, I'm trying to get away, and so that's the at the end of the day, the end of the movie. That's the picture we're painted of the scrolls.
Yeah. And I'm also just not personally and I think there's reason for this for the idea of the motivation of individuals, right? When you see someone uh, doing something, you're always curious why, and
Mm,
there's oftentimes some sort of thought process or motivation behind what they're doing. Even if it's a base desire, there is some sort of something you can trail it back to. Whereas this idea of just pure desire for raw power is just, I think, such a stupid motivation. It really isn't believable in any way
mm,
because it's a slow corruption to get someone to just have such a
mm.
pure desire for power in that way.
Yeah,
Like there's
it
a
doesn't
path that
make
they
a
go
whole
down
lot
to
of
get
sense.
there. In regards to, because those are all the villains, right? And I
Mm,
think that the villains are definitely beyond stock, but the main characters, allies, Nick Fury, the Skrull later on, that kind of
hmm
thing. They can have some motivation, but at the end of the day, they do kind of become not kind of they become lockstep allies with Captain Marvel,
Yeah.
and I've seen this a lot recently because this is the part. Ironically enough, this is what I had the most thoughts on, even though it's such a small point. But it's like, why does this keep happening? Like, why do we have these characters that even if they have some development like Nick Fury, why do they end up taking all of this motivation and then just smashing it into the primary character's motivations and goals and just going with them?
hmm
Um, and I think it's natural for us to do that,
hmm
right? I think that there is a sense in which we see strong leaders around us, and it's very easy to buy into their vision for the future and to just go with them.
hmm
Uh, but that isn't a great buy-in for conflict. It doesn't
hmm
make a very compelling story where people have their own motivations for doing things, how you have people engaged for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, it's like
go
with
ahead.
any story, like even the allies will have their own motives, their own ideas about how things should be done. They may follow a strong leader, but it doesn't mean that they always completely 100% agree with them or like they just
No.
go on board with everything. Um, I think I don't know if I've said this, and maybe we talked about this in our allies movies worth watching, but I'm a huge fan of the Expanse book series.
Mhm.
And in that book series, which is like a sci-fi story of the ship the Rocinante and its crew, um, the crew follows James Holden, who's the captain of the ship, and there's almost like this idea like every story, every mission, they all follow him as a leader. They follow his prerogative, like he's the leader.
Right.
But even then, like you have these other characters like Alex Kamal and why am I blanking on some of them? Like you have all these other characters, like they follow because they believe it's the right thing to do sometimes, but they also have their own ideas. Like, okay, this is what we should do. Like these little things they have these disagreements on at certain points. Like they have their own ideas clearly. I was like, so they all
Sure.
have like, even though they follow every story more or less James Holden's lead, they also have their own ideas. They're fully fleshed out characters. Like you understand why they did make the decisions they make in each story.
I think that the difference between and I haven't seen The Expanse, but what you're describing for The Expanse and a movie like this is simply the level of buy-in you get. And
Hmm.
so what I mean by that is Nick Fury only needs a line or two where he says to Coulson or to someone else, "Oh, I'm doing this to gain intel on Captain Marvel," or something else to provide some motivation where he has his own motive for doing this that is apart from just doing what Captain Marvel's doing because clearly she's the good guy or whatever. Um, it we don't need that much to show his own side motivations. And the important point is that when you don't have that, it looks like this person took all of their own motivation and just threw it to the side for nothing, as if it didn't matter to them, for the
Hmm.
sake of joining this cause of this person. And
Hmm.
if you're a wishy-washy reed in the wind that just blows over when somebody walks by, that's fine. But then you're not a compelling character by yourself.
Hmm.
That's just the fact of it. And if we're looking for conflict, we should use the side characters as an avenue for that. And uh, it when you do that, you add other problems, right? It makes it harder to tie everything up where you have these side issues or
Hmm.
subplots with the allies where it's like, okay, do they get their issues resolved? How do you have them being true to their character while also fulfilling the climax or the overall issue of the movie? And that's a hard thing to solve. And that's the point, is that
Hmm.
these characters add this extra conflict. They make it harder to resolve. And that's what makes the tension so good in the movie. I just think it's sloppy that they
Hmm.
just buy into the main character's issue or their quest without having some sort of inflection point where they really consider if this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And Nick Fury does it the best out of anyone in this movie. So I'm using him as an example because he's the highest point, and there is some reason to say you could still make the argument after I said all this to say Nick Fury is still a somewhat compelling side character, and I think I could give you that. But then if you look at every other character in the movie, they're pegs lower than him, and
Yeah.
they don't do that. Anyways, it's hard to do. It's inconvenient to do, but when you opt for that convenience to just have them buy in, it's you make sloppy stories, and those aren't compelling stories. So there's my 2 cents. Hey everyone, quick note. Hope you're all enjoying the podcast. Before we get back to it, would love to get some feedback from you for us. That's right. We're looking for reviews. If you could just give us 5 seconds of your time, hit the little stars in the app that you're listening to it on right now, or give us a thumbs up if you're listening to us on YouTube or one of the other platforms such as that. Anyways, appreciate you guys' time helping us out, helping you guys get more of this great content. Now, back to the show. Did you think that it's obviously a sci-fi world? They show the Kree universe and all of that. Did you find it believable?
There are some consistent rules. So I mean, it wasn't like there was no like there are some believability. But there are some points where it's like I don't know. The rules are tenuous at best. I feel like I don't know, or it's just like there's certain things like okay, is that really believable? More or less. I mean, for example, when there's a whole scene in the bar where Fury Carol kind of interrogates Fury about his backstory to like see if
Right.
he's a scroll or not. There's a part of me is like, well, she doesn't know him. How would she verify this information? Like, how would this
Right.
prove anything that she's a scroll or
That's
not?
funny.
It's just
Uh-huh.
like this scene proves nothing. I mean, the only thing it
Yeah,
does is it provides some basis for the idea that the scrolls can't copy long-term memory, where it's like they can only copy short-term memories, like like surface level stuff when they shapeshift into another person.
that's interesting because that is tied to, I guess that is tied to the universe at large, tying to
Mm,
how the scrolls engage. Because my initial thought was, oh, is that even that's more of a plotline goal, but or plotline issue than a
mm.
universe issue. But I guess if it's verifying the scrolls, that's interesting. What do you have like an idea of, or is there something in the comics about how they verify if someone's a scroll or not?
No, that was pretty consistent. Like the idea of long term memory. Like, but even then, like Skrulls can like in the comics they can like interrogate and like get a lot of key information, and some like get so good at it they can like pass for the people they're impersonating for a long time.
That's interesting. I did remember that being a little weird. It did stick out as a big issue to me, but it is somewhat of a small flaw. I still gave him points on this because overall the universe is fairly cohesive. That is an excellent example though. So
Okay.
I don't know that I would take away points from it, but I could see how you would take away a little bit for
Mm.
that. For that, um, do you think that the sacrifices, like, is if the hero doesn't achieve their goal, this being theirs or Captain Marvel, is it are they going to die emotionally, physically, or whatever in some way if they don't achieve their goal?
It wasn't like she had a lot of connection. Like the stakes for her weren't raised to a huge point aside from what she already had at the beginning. Like maybe she cares for Fury a little bit, but as a friend, I don't know. It was like maybe she was some connection there. Maybe some for her friend that she lost. But other than that, it's like it wasn't like they were directly threatened per se. Like their lives weren't
Mhm.
necessarily at stake. I guess I don't know. It's like there was some questionable like stakes, maybe. I guess it's just like she wasn't like it wasn't like we were given a whole lot. Like she was going to lose a whole lot if she lost. Like aside
Right,
from her like ease of conscience and freedom.
right.
So
Yeah, I go ahead.
and this also ties back to the whole thing where it's like we're not really given a whole lot of reason to believe she will lose.
I think that the big thing that I was left with was why was this movie so compelling at the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you obviously didn't think quite the same. So for me, what I thought was more compelling was everything that was going on internally about
Mm-hmm.
who she was and not knowing who that was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so her exploration, her self exploration, did seem very um like critical to her. How
Mm-hmm.
she needed to know who she was. Clearly, there was something very important about what happened in her past that affects who she is today. And you even get the impression, just as an audience, that she doesn't belong on Kree,
Mm-hmm.
and she's not a Kree, and all of that stuff. So it's a little, as an audience, you do get the impression that she does need to figure that out. You don't get the idea that if she doesn't figure it out, it's the end of the world for her. So there is a sense in which this still isn't fulfilled in that, but that gets resolved pretty like halfway through the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You realize why she's around or what she came for, and that's not really a big revelation because they've been hinting at it this entire time and slowly feeding you more information. But it's a big information leap for her, and that's significant. But it's not really the main conflict of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I get caught up because at the end of the day, either one that gets figured out, and then they have a very very long denouement where they just slowly play out her fighting the bad guys and then saving the scroll and all of that stuff, or which I don't think is what they were doing, or you have the situation where she is just that's just a side quest, more or
Mm-hmm.
less. And in that, she figures out necessary information to fulfill the true quest, which is to destroy her enemies, or whatever you want to say that goal is. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's I think that they had potential. That's all I want to say here is that they had
Yeah.
potential with using her backstory to make a potential for sacrifice, and they just didn't capitalize
Yeah. No, I think this movie, like the second time around, like this is my second time watching this movie, like
on it.
since it came out in theaters. And I'd say even this time around, I noticed there was actually a lot more potential to this movie than I initially gave it credit for. Like there was definitely things that could have been developed, that they could have told a very interesting story and could have told like a more intriguing like conflict, or I don't know, like there's certain things that could have done
Yeah,
more, could have done better, but it was almost like they felt like they needed to shove a bunch of other stuff, extra stuff into the movie, and it like
right.
bloated the plot. more or less, and bloated the conflicts and everything. So it was like it kind of made it unclear what certain parts of the movie were about, like what the overall like theme and conflict of the movie was supposed to be. And I don't know, like hidden in there was potential, and they could have made a great movie out of this, but they failed to encapsulate that, to capture that and show it out on the screen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. If they had a different way of setting this up well, how would you think that that could be done?
I haven't fully
Bruise.
thought about it, and maybe some of this does. I did think some things during, well, this is, I'll probably get back to you on that later on in this episode, like once we've
Okay.
answered a few more questions. So,
And a
mm-hmm.
lot of it does come to the climax and how that plays out.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that's fine. Is there anything that the VAERS stands for? Is there something about her situation or her character that transcends her
Did you just skip a
environment and
bunch of?
makes it? I skipped the villains thing because we already had an in-depth conversation about the villains.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, if you wanted to say more about the villains, we can.
I mean, all I think I would say about the villains is that they were compelling at first when they were the Skrulls. They got less compelling when it turned to the Kree.
Right.
So, because I feel like the Skrulls made an interesting villain, like they made an interesting they were an interesting character, like because they're a villain who could hide in society. You don't know who's your enemy, who's your friend.
Right.
So it's like they were a very compelling like threat. Where it's like, ooh, you actually don't know who you're fighting necessarily. It could be your friend. Like this could be a Skrull or could not be. You don't
Right.
know, and it's very hard to tell, like
Right.
on a moment by moment basis. And plus they did capture Veers or Captain Marvel at the very beginning of the movie. Like she is captured. Clearly, they kind of have the means of capturing her somewhat, but after that, it's like the villains become less compelling, and like the conflict kind of goes downhill more or less. So that's all I was
Yeah.
gonna say as far as the villains go.
And that's also something we'll see for sure by the end of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
definitely, especially with the what's it called, the the internet being, I don't, the like divine,
The Kree
divine website.
intelligence, the Supreme
Yeah,
intelligence.
the
Yeah.
supreme intelligence, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
Not the www of
Mm-hmm.
the Kree.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, yeah, so the fray, the deciding to get involved in the situation, was there something that Varys stood for?
Um, and this is where things get bloated, I think, as far as what I said before. Because the first time, like when I watched this movie, I just assumed the conflict was almost like feminism versus masculinity kind of thing. 'Cause, like the feminism stuff is like pushed so heavily throughout the movie, it's hard to say like almost like it was almost like a story about female empowerment versus masculinity. But the second time I watched it, I began to realize the conflict between the Skrulls and the Kree isn't actually that. It's more like because it's like they're fugitives. It's almost like in a
Right.
the idea of like tyrannical government, like trying to consolidate power and like make like tie down its citizens and like, oh, you can't be rebellious against us. Like you have to submit. Um, so I guess like it's more like weakness versus strength, like siding with the weak or siding with the strong,
Right.
maybe. Like maybe there was actually kind of another like ideal story going on there that I didn't actually fully grasp the first time around. It's like, oh wait, there's actually more going on here. And so in a way, I guess you could say by getting involved, Captain Marvel kind of is like about protecting the weak and like
Right.
standing up against the strong, like almost that kind of ideal battle where it's like,
I didn't get the exact things that you're saying, but that's fine because we're along the same lines. I was thinking of, standing for justice, and at the
mm,
beginning, she thought that justice was defeating the Skrull from oppressing the people of this planet, and then she realizes that they're actually the ones who are being oppressed, and then justice turns into uh, fighting the Kree. So
mm,
there is a sense of that, or the pursuit of truth, and what is the truth. I think both of those things were heavy into this, and so there is a sense in which she is seeking the truth herself, and that's why I lean more toward that one, because in seeking the truth, she finds out the truth about the Kree and the Skrull. So um, but they're all around the same theme of truth and justice and all of these good ideals sticking out. It's hard to develop that though when the character themselves have no room to develop.
Hmm.
But yeah. Anyways, we'll get to that more. Did you think that they were trying to achieve a goal that was significant for their own life?
This is number 8, right? Or the
I
gang?
haven't numbered my questions.
Okay. In
This
entering the
is
fray is the
yeah,
main
it's the
character.
second
Okay.
question. Yeah,
Okay. Who's everything in the movie?
yeah.
Okay. Sorry, my brain just blanked right
No,
there.
you're
Just like,
good.
oh, okay, wait.
I need to make a Google Doc or something for this to make it a little easier.
I mean, in a way, it's not like they lose their need everything they need to live. I mean, she is invincible. It's not like she would die or something if she lost. It just was like she'd probably lose her freedom and just become enslaved again to the Kree.
No, and this is kind of similar to what we talked about before, so it's not worth rehashing too much.
Mm,
But I said once again, her side goal, figuring out who she is, had significance to her own life. That was a
mm,
big deal. But that wasn't the goal of the movie. The primary
mm,
goal seemed to be to defeat the enemy,
mm-hmm,
and that had no significance to her at the end of the day. She wasn't super emotionally tied to the Kree, clearly, because she turned on them in a dime, and she didn't really have a reason to support the Skrull other than it was just the right thing to do. Which I'm not saying we
yeah.
should oppress people who are refugees. What I'm saying is that she didn't have a personal motivation to be tied to it
Mm,
other than pure benevolence, which means her buy-in as a character isn't that strong.
mm-hmm, yeah.
The situation where they're thrown from a bad situation to a worse situation, heightening the tension of the plot. The part that spans a long section of the movie but doesn't really get a lot of credit, but plays into how much we value the end. How did you think of this?
This is one of those places this movie does fail. I feel like
Okay.
at the beginning of the movie, like when we don't know much about, and probably this is because we don't know much about Captain Marvel or
Right.
Veers, who
Right.
actually her full name, if we haven't said it already, is Carol Danvers. But she at the beginning of the movie, she like there's more conflict. Like there's maybe a few times she fails. Like maybe there's some question, like tension there, where it's like she gets captured, then she escapes. I mean, it's like there's some tension there, but after that, she doesn't get captured again. She doesn't really fail again. Got the whole rest of the movie until maybe the scene where she gets captured by the Kree and like gets plugged into the Supreme Intelligence again. Like that's the only other
Right.
time in the movie she fails. Other than that, she always wins. Like so, there's no really real
Right.
tension in the movie. There's no real like question of the
Interesting.
conflict. So I mean, it was there at the beginning, and I had to give it points for that
Right.
part of it. But as the movie progressed, it became less and less there, and became less and less of a thing. Like at least for her character. Like maybe for Fury,
Yeah.
there was some more tension, but not for her. So maybe so I gave it some points where it's like I kind of gave it points where it deserved it, but it was like I had to drop it a lot of points here.
Yeah. What did you, just out of curiosity, out of 2.5 points, how many points did you give it?
Two and a half
Or two
points.
twenty five 25 points or whatever it is for
Oh.
this big section.
Okay. I kind of just gave it 5.
Yeah. So half a point out of the total 9,
Mm,
when it could have had 2.5. Yeah. So I gave it 1. I see where you're going with that. I think I was pretty close to that, but I was thinking of different reasons in my mind,
mm,
partially, which I think is interesting because she's she gets captured, like you said at the beginning, which is similar.
mm,
She in chasing the scroll to Earth. It seems like things are getting worse. Getting captured by the Shield agents. Those all were like unideal situations. Getting from one situation to an unideal situation. So I thought, especially because she was in some pursuit of figuring out who she was, it seemed like that part of the beginning was somewhat compelling. Not super
mm,
compelling because I never really thought that she was in serious danger, but
mm,
still enough that I was engaged in the movie. So yeah,
mm.
I gave it a point, but still not a lot of the overall. What they could have gotten, what they could have done with the character was undervalued.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyways. So Revelation. The Book of Revelation from. No, just kidding. The Revelation of the movies. So, did you think that there was a movie revelation. Did you think there was a revelation in this movie that changed everything?
This movie actually has that, where it's like
Yeah,
the reveal that the Skrulls are fugitives, not at war with the Kree. They're trying to escape the Kree. That was a big enough revelation, and it was, I think,
yeah,
played well enough because considering the shape shifting of the Skrulls, like how they're kind of portrayed as the villains up to this point in the movie, it was actually the one point this movie did very well, where it's like when it's revealed, like, oh, they're actually fugitives. They're not actually the villains here. They're just trying to find their own home. It was kind of like, okay, this reveal, this is the one thing the movie did right. So I gave it full
right.
points for the revelation because, like, okay, this was a good enough reveal.
No, I agree. I thought that it because it is a 180 of the entire movie, and
Hmm.
they did it well.
Well, yeah, it's like
You are
it completely changes
you
who the
aren't really
villain
expecting
is
it.
too.
It changes the entire movie, so it's a big deal. Did you think that the ending had some sort of knockout surprise, some sort of twist that ended the movie well?
Not really. I mean, the ending didn't really have a big surprise reveal. It was the reveal was like what 3/4 of the way through the movie, like two
Yeah,
thirds of the way through the movie, and this there was no real like big reveal at the end where it's like it's just like it's a finalization of the plot.
and that's hard. I grant that.
Hmm.
It's good to fight for, good to try. They didn't
Hmm.
get it, so that's fine. But there goes half a point. So, does the main character grow as a person? We already know she doesn't. She sucks. Dang it. Uh, and then I don't know if you want to talk about themes. Does the movie have a
Oh,
theme? Can you
actually,
talk a little bit about
I
that?
did have a funny note for that one, and maybe this is a good
Okay,
question. Do you think she
go
actually
ahead.
becomes worse as a character by the end of the movie?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Does she become more arrogant or more like callous by the end of the movie than she was at the beginning? Like because she becomes more independent, like more freedom, like, and she's also kind of demeaning of certain characters throughout the movie. I don't know, like does she become worse?
Well, she definitely doesn't change for the better. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting idea. I mean, I think it's hard to say. You
Hmm.
could maybe look at Jan Rog and his son back to the Kree Empire as a level of arrogance beyond what she had previously, right?
Hmm.
And say, okay, she's a terrible individual, or a worse individual at least. So I think you can make the argument for it.
Hmm.
I'm going to give it
I
grace and
mean,
say not really,
it really didn't
but
matter for our review, but it
no,
just was an interesting question I like had written down in
yeah,
my notes.
I've not really thought about because usually when you have a character going from bad to worse,
Hmm.
they become a villain. And
Yes.
so it's interesting to think about how a good character painted in a good light could actually become worse over time,
Hmm.
and to still paint them in a good light. Uh, I don't know that this is a full manifestation of that, but it is a
Hmm.
potentially a nudge in that direction for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, what did you think about the themes? Did the themes align with how you thought she was as a character earlier on? Is there a theme?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a lot of thematic elements in this movie, but as we said before, it's very bloated, and there's like almost like several like thematic conflicts going at once. So either the conflict is about woman empowerment, where it's like woman can do anything kind of message, or it's a message about standing up for the weak, like protecting the
Uh-huh.
weak when they can't, kind of situation. Like, so if there is a theme or message, it's something along one of those two lines is what I came away with. With that being
Yeah.
said, it is strong. The themes are strong enough to be noticeable, so you have to give it some points there. But because there's so many, because of how much is going on, I had to take away points because it's not clear. Like it wasn't clearly about one or the other, so I kind of took away points because it wasn't clear.
Interesting.
I mean, I don't want to diss on the whole like female empowerment like message, but there's almost a part of me that thinks you could have probably taken that whole conflict thematic elements out of the movie, and you would have had a stronger movie because of it, because it would have focused more on the other conflict of ideals. Maybe. So like it might have been a better movie. Maybe. I don't know, but it's just a thought that came to mind when I was.
Sure. So you brought up this idea a lot of female empowerment. When you're
Mhm.
thinking of this, what comes to mind in the movie?
Well, several things come to mind. I mean, for example, when they reveal her backstory, like they're constantly showing like guys and men like belittling her, like saying she's not good enough, and like making fun of her almost for her gender, more or less. Um, and it clearly upsets her, like as you see like later on in the movie, like she just it irritates her. Furthermore, when she's in like these little situations with other men and other things, it's she almost like takes these little moments, like little things that like almost like to belittle them. It's like, oh, I could have done that already, or I could have done this, or it's like I had the ability to take care of this. Almost like making them look like oh, I don't need you kind of thing. Like, or it's just
Uh-huh.
like I'm just like giving you like almost like she's how do you like it's almost like it's condescension to a child, where it's like, oh, I'm getting you feel good about this for now, but really I could have taken care of this kind of thing.
Okay.
So it's like, except the
Interesting.
people aren't children in these situations. These are like men who have skills and such.
You're thinking specifically of Nick Fury when they're locked up or
Yeah, I'm thinking
situations
of
like
Nick
that.
Fury and like some other
Uh-huh.
situations like that. So it's like there was just a few situations throughout the movie where it's just like it's clear they were pushing a female empowerment message, which in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just I don't know, like the way it was done in this movie, it could have been better. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe they should have focused more on one message or the other. If they were going to go with themes and telling a message, choose one. Like make the
Right.
plot more cohesive around that. But it wasn't clearly about one or the other.
After you give those examples, I could see how you take that away from the movie.
Hmm.
I didn't personally think that that was a very strong message in the movie, so I don't
Hmm.
find that a very it doesn't seem viable as the primary thing to take away in my
Hmm.
mind. The definitely and maybe partially is the idea that I don't have a problem with her being a strong woman because she
Hmm.
clearly is a strong woman,
Oh
just
yeah,
how she's portrayed.
yeah.
It, it,
Hmm.
it would be something to say, and I think it would actually be more compelling if she was a clearly incompetent woman and then becomes a competent woman throughout the movie.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, so that would have
she's
been an interesting, more
competent from the
interesting
start.
story.
Sure, sure. But she's definitely a competent woman. I think there are definitely competent women out there, so I don't have a problem
Hmm.
with her being a competent woman
Yeah.
at her
No,
tasks.
I
I
I
think it
don't
is a little
either.
unbelievable that she's able to do everything, but she's it's fine.
Hmm.
Uh I
Yeah.
I do think that the other themes do exist in there, such as the ideas like we talked about truth and justice that I mentioned earlier, or the idea that truth wins out in the end despite how deceitful your enemies can
Hmm.
be, right?
Hmm.
Seems to be a pretty strong theme. I give it points for the theme because I thought that there is strong ideas presented
Hmm.
here. Whether or not that they made a great story around those themes is a whole other question.
Hmm.
Um, but I did think that overall they still had values clearly presented in a way to hopefully engage you as an audience.
No, I mean, I as I said, I don't have any problem with a empowered woman kind of thing, a strong female character. In fact, I actually think if done right, they are very like I love those kind of stories where like if they're done right. The problem with this movie is Carol Danvers, we're not given a whole lot of reason to empathize with her. As we said very early on in this
Sure.
podcast, she doesn't really have a weakness. There's not really like
Right.
a reason to believe she would fail. Like it's kind of like she's this all-powerful like super person where it's like she's invincible. She doesn't really get hurt kind of. It's like I mean, it's like she's not very relatable, not really a lot of reason to follow her like as a character per se. She's and she also is kind of callous and arrogant a little bit. So it's like they're just like these things where it's like if she was developed more as a character, given more reason for us giving us more reason to empathize with her, I would have loved the movie a whole lot more. Probably even given it more points in some categories. But we aren't
Right.
given those. So,
And it would be interesting to look at her as a character compared to, say, another strong, competent female lead, such as like Katniss Everdeen or someone like
mhm,
that, and see how they
yeah.
stack up in this kind of thing. Because I haven't reviewed Katniss Everdeen's movie, The Hunger Games, but Katniss Everdeen's, the character Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger
Mhm,
Games. Anyways, I haven't reviewed that, but my impression, having watched the movie, is that she would be given points for being a strong female lead who also
Yeah.
is compelling
Hmm.
in her own way. So maybe that's a good place to look if you as an audience
Hmm.
are curious what this would look like in comparison. And that has nothing to do with whether or not it's a like a feminist message or not. It has more to do
Hmm.
with how this character was developed compellingly. And frankly, she's too strong to be compelling.
Hmm.
Varys
Another
is too strong.
example. I actually have another example. And this movie probably stands out in my mind because of this. The movie
Little
itself
House on the
could have used.
Prairie.
No. There is a recently. I don't know how many years ago. There was a Tomb Raider adaptation movie.
Laura
Uh,
Croft.
yeah, Laura Croft. But and the movie, the story could have used a lot of work. It wasn't a great movie story wise, but the character development into Laura Croft was phenomenal, and she was like she was a good example of a strong female character who was weak, who struggled, who had weakness, like she had flaws, but it was like, and at the end of the movie, she changed over the course of the movie, became more resourceful, became more independent, became like the stronger person, and her story was heavily compelling. Like she
Right.
grows as a result of the story and conflict, and it wasn't like, and it was actually, and I liked that part of the movie so much, like it stuck with me. It was like this is actually a good example of how a strong female character should be written, because this is like it was phenomenal to me, like how much I related to her.
You're absolutely right. And to be clear to all of our audience, it's not that we're saying that uh, females need to be weak and then become strong throughout the story. I think that
No,
that goes across any gender. You have
yes,
the males too. For example, Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins is partially a great character because he is so weak and needs the help of all these people around
hmm
him. And as he develops as a character, he grows competency, but also grows in his risks as well. So it's all about having those characters start from a place of incompetency, risk, and growing into the role that's demanded of them. And
hmm
that's just a great thing to do to any character.
hmm
So yeah,
yeah.
the ending. Did you think that the ending left you with a desire to watch the next one? Did it leave you satisfied? Did it leave you unsatisfied? What did you think?
uh, I mean, as I said, I mean, I remember the first time watching this movie, I was definitely very unsatisfied. I didn't like this movie. This time
Mhm.
around, I was still unsatisfied, but maybe not as much unsatisfied, because I think I saw potential in certain things that, and maybe this goes to the whole extended universe of Marvel, where I just was like, I
Mhm.
began to realize this time around, there was actually more potential in some of these things, these elements, than I gave it credit the first time around. For example, the Skrulls are actually an interesting dynamic, have an interesting like dynamic. They're an interesting character race. So it actually made me this movie, this viewing of Captain Marvel made me realize, see the appeal of like the series Secret Invasion, which I haven't seen either, which is like
Right.
I began to realize, okay, actually, it's a little bit. I could see why a series like that would be a little bit more compelling now, because this is an interesting race, an interesting alien species. You could do some interesting things with this, like story wise, and there was some interesting things here and there. So it's like, okay, this movie, even though the story overall I was a little unsatisfied, I could see potential
Right.
this time around, which I didn't see before.
No, I think that that's a great way
Hmm.
to phrase the whole movie, honestly. And
Hmm.
I think that that's reflected in what I thought. This is one of those movies that I watched and walked away from saying, it was fine. I
Hmm.
enjoyed it for that watch. I probably wouldn't watch it again, obviously,
Hmm.
based on everything that came before it. But my overall impression just watching the movie, and this is why this entire thing is this is a very feely point for you personally. Did you watch it and how did you feel at the end, right? So if anything varies in the whole movie, this one should probably. And the fact that there is some consistency says something about great movies versus not great movies. But this one left me satisfied. So I gave it a
Okay.
quarter of a point. You know, it's like, okay, it was enjoyable. I do not look forward to the next one, but I also didn't walk away saying, like, man, this is crap. I hate it. You know, it was
Hmm.
fine. And I will not watch it again, probably.
I mean, it's why I haven't watched it since seeing it in theaters. Like it's been what I saw in theaters 2018. I didn't watch it. Like the only reason I watched it again is because you wanted to review it. It's like okay, so
Exactly.
And
This is how I sucker
I
you
mean,
in.
I don't hate that I had to watch it again as much as I thought I would, but I was like, oh, okay, actually, there was things to be taken out of this movie that I didn't realize before. So,
Yeah. And that's
and,
probably the best takeaway you can have is that
mhm.
there's even in a lot of these movies that we don't think are that great, there are some really valuable things we can take away from them and carry with us into even like our day to day. Cool. Well, that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back, of course, again next week. Hopefully, we are reviewing The Marsh King's Daughter, but I don't know. We'll see. You'll have to see next week. But until then, this is a Lost Plot. We will see everyone back here next time.